Welcome back, guys, to another video. So this time we're doing a raid encounter tier list. I included all the raid encounters from Destiny 2. I did not include Vault of Glass or King's Fall. I wanted to focus just on the Destiny 2, the new raids in Destiny 2 here. I did also only included encounters that gave you rewards at the end. I didn't include any kind of like encounter like jumping section that gave you just bonus chests or anything like that. So just specifically those encounters that gave you like a pinnacle reward or something like that. But this was recorded on my live stream on February 17th. Feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought of my tier list, where you would rank certain encounters as well. So let's get right into the video. We're gonna start with Leviathan first, right here at the top. So the first one would be the door encounter. So you did get a chest after you did the doors, and I count that. It wasn't really a bonus chest. I know you could get some stuff and get tokens. I think if you only got like a weapon or something, like your first run every week. I don't think in multiple runs you didn't, if I remember correctly. So I include the doors. So this is the symbol for the doors. So, all right, the door encounter is wasn't bad. So you had to go from door to door, getting all the staffs, killing the scions, plant the staff in there. If a cabal made it to the door, you'd take the staff away. It wasn't bad. I think it was a good, like, average encounter. You had to use some teamwork. Because you had to make sure they can get to the staffs or they're gone. So I would say though, like, this wasn't like exciting, you know? I can remember many times people just went AFK during that door opening and they did not care at all. So I'm gonna rank this at C to start. I'm gonna say the door opening is about like a C. I think that's a good area for the door encounter. It's not exciting, but like it still has some purpose to it. It's still kind of fun. But yeah, some people definitely went AFK in that stuff. All right, everything else will just kind of go down the line here. I'll do Gauntlet first. So the Gauntlet, you know, dunking the balls, running through the track around the corner, yelling at your friends, "Hey man, come on, shoot the arrow, look to your left, look to your right, like do this, come on, stay on the plate." That was probably one of my favorite encounters of that raid, because if you were with a really good team and you did that right, it went so well and it was so fun. So I really enjoyed this encounter a lot, and I actually would hope they would do like more coordination kind of like encounters. You had to really be coordinated, like with your runner and with your partner, and kind of shoot the right arrow. Like you would shoot your arrow, you wait for your buddy to shoot the other arrow. Sometimes they would shoot the wrong arrow, stuff like that. So I would say I'm wildin'. What do you mean? I think this encounter, the Gauntlet encounter, I thought it was fun. I liked being a runner, and I liked being a shooter. I like both sides of it. Out of all the Leviathan encounters, I would say that, all right. I'm putting the doors are at C. So I'm going to put the Gauntlet at B. I think if anything, it's like, it's average, you know? It's not terrible, it's not great. There's some ad clear. There's some running mechanics. There's some coordination you have to work with your team. So I'm going to put this at a B. I'm going to leave that at B for now. I may adjust. We'll see. We got all these other encounters to go to. All right, let's get into the dogs. The number one thing I can think about every time I think about the dogs is everybody just yelling at each other about who got seen by the dog. There was always like one or two people in your group when you would do it, and somebody would get seen instantly. I don't think I've ever done that encounter flawlessly before. Well, actually, no. Maybe before it was sunset and we ran through it, and you just need like one stack and you can instantly delete the dogs then. So sure, maybe then we probably did it flawless, but like on accident probably. I would say the dogs, it was fun. It was a good time. But mechanics wise, it wasn't really great. I mean, like, you had to sneak around the garden. That was kind of fun. But it was a real pain in the ass. And if people didn't know where they were going, it was a mess. So I'm going to put this at C. All right, next encounter. Let's go with the Leviathan Bass encounter. So the Bass, you know, you gotta stand on your plates. You gotta kill the guy in front of you, the Cabal guy with the swords. You gotta run to the middle and shoot the pots. I'm gonna say this encounter was pretty bad. I'm not a huge fan of it. I think it wasn't that great because, for one, the boss was just a bunch of purple jars. So I'm gonna say that the Bass encounter in Leviathan, I think that it is not great. It's very basic stuff. I get it, first raid, simple mechanics. Maybe I should go easy on it, but I'm going to throw this in D. I had more fun doing dogs and doing the door in the beginning than doing the Bass, to be honest. So I'm going to put this in D. All right, and then the final encounter. So Callus. All right, so Callus, I would say Callus was the best encounter of that raid, in my opinion. I like gauntlets, as you can see, I put it in B, but I would say Callus was probably the best encounter. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna shuffle things around already one raid into this. I'm gonna put the doors, although they're great, they're probably at the level of the bath. Let's just be honest there. The dogs, I'll leave there at C. I'm gonna leave the gauntlet at B, and then I'm gonna put Callus. I put Callus at A. I'm gonna put him right here at A. Out of all the encounters, it was the best encounter. Definitely back then. I know you had the instant reload with the Warlock Rifts and with the Titan Barricade, so that made like the Cold Heart damage meta and a lot of other kind of different weapons. You could just instantly reload your gun and use them against Callus. That was kind of nice. But I think it was also just not good because of that. But just, I mean, everything, it was a combination, obviously, of all the encounters. Having to rotate the plates for damage. Make sure you're jumping on the plates together at the same time. There's always that one person every now and then would jump on the plate too early, and that would kind of mess things up. The Void Room, like his other Ascendant Realm, whatever you want to call it, that was tricky sometimes. It was easy once you knew the routes of the stones sliding down it. But I think it was definitely pretty tough. Especially if you did it on Prestige mode, where Prestige mode, it would randomly choose people that would get teleported outside and inside or whatever. That made it so much more harder. Yeah, I think that's, that's why it's probably going to beat A for me. Like that you could get good at shooting the skulls to improve DPS. That was also great. Yeah. It's like the more skulls you shot, the more DPS. That was actually really nice. I kind of wish they would do stuff like that in other raids. Do a certain mechanic to increase your DPS. And if you do the mechanic well, you get more DPS. I mean, there's some other encounters, I guess. I mean, we'll go through them. All right. Next raid, Eater Worlds. Here, now we're gonna get into the year one raids where it's a little struggling here. All right. So year one was not great. It had some good memories here and there, but overall, it was a struggling year for sure. For Eater of Worlds, I put the intro part in here. So the puzzle part where you did the jumping on the platforms, going from platform to platform. You could only have one person on each platform. You had to complete like the platforming part. And then you had to do like the wave defense against the Cabal. Then that gave you a chest. So I would say like that, to me, that intro was, the puzzle was fun, but man, was it frustrating as hell. There were definitely ways people could skip past it. I remember people just Titan missiling past it. I remember people doing like skips with like Dawnblade. I'm gonna put the intro part at Eater Worlds at D. It's very forgettable. I don't think it's that exciting. When I think back on that the times I've had teaching that part, especially, was doing some Sherpa raids back then. It was definitely frustrating for teaching new people, like what platforms to step on and stuff like that. So, and then I don't count the part after that where you had to do some jumping because there wasn't really a chest there. You had to like go through that kind of like pathway and you had to like run from barrier to barrier and not get hit by the electricity. I don't count that. There was no chest. It was okay. So we immediately got right into the first phase of the boss. So first phase of the boss, that's when they teach you how to do the cooking part, where you have to like grab the Vex heads, put them in your little oven, grab it, and then you have to shoot the correct part of his shell. And there'd be like, oh, we got 3 void over here and a soul over here. So you had to like kind of rotate and then shoot the right parts. It wasn't a bad mechanic, it was kind of creative. You could have like one person defend and the other guy go out and get the Vex heads, put them in your oven to cook those, then go around and shoot it. But ultimately, we know that just kind of tied into the second encounter, that final boss phase. I'd have to rank this down, probably just at a D. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't really that tough. It was just pretty average. And for me, something that easy and that average, that's a D. That's not like exciting. And then Eater Worlds second phase, the final boss there. Final boss for Eater Worlds. So you had the cooking part from the first phase. And then you had to grab your Vex head and you had to shoot the ball. You had 3 balls and everyone had to shoot the balls into the center of the shield to open up the shield so you can do DPS to the boss. I remember that boss being pretty easy to melt, especially like towards the end of its life. When I think about that encounter, I just think about how annoying that encounter was, because it was so annoying to shoot that ball into that hole. You would have people mess that up so many times. And then on top of that, after you do damage, you would have to rush into the center, and shoot his weak spot. But it was like sustained damage. It wasn't like just total damage on his weak spot. So it's just like you have to keep doing damage to it with like your primary or whatever until it blows up. That part was so annoying as well. All of these parts were easy, but like if you had people that didn't know how to do it or it was their first time doing it, it was almost a guarantee that you probably weren't going to get through it the first couple times. It was going to take you a bit for everyone to get used to it and what to do. But once everyone knew what they were doing, it was definitely a really easy encounter, easy to do. So to me, I'm going to put this at C. I put that at the level of dogs. I think it was interesting and kind of somewhat exciting, although it was annoying to shoot the ball into the hole and do all that stuff. Mechanics-wise, wasn't too bad. DPS-wise, you had to kind of gather up together with all the enemies kind of flooding in and stuff. Not too bad. So you had to do some coordination there. So yeah, I'd put it at C. Now we're going to move into Spire. The intro part, you did get a chest at the end of it, so I do count it. And then you had to throw the ball around the room to each other, and you had to throw the ball into the gauntlet in the middle. I would say still, for an intro, I'm thinking like for an intro encounter, not too bad. It taught you the mechanics pretty much of the entire raid right away. And there was tons of enemies kind of flooding in, so you had to have people kind of keep their ads down. I kind of like this intro encounter, because there really was a good amount of enemies that were flooding in from like the side doors and stuff, and everybody was a little bit separated too. So like from what I remember, you had 4 plates, 2 in the back, 2 in the front. So you had 1 person per plate, and then the other 2 people would be floaters. So they had 1 floating at the back, 1 in the front, and they would help kill ads. But I remember so many times just getting overwhelmed with ads, especially on prestige mode. It was really tough because there was match game, if I remember as well. And there was, I'm pretty sure, void shields or solar shields on those guys. So, but I think for an intro encounter, it was pretty good. So I'd say for an intro, yeah, I'd say this is a C. All right, right after the intro, that's when we got into the jumping part. The jumping part, you did get a chest for. Out of all the jumping sections that Bungie has had, I would say this to me was probably the most fun part. Fun jumping like encounter area, whatever you want to call it. Did Argos so dirty? Come on, man. You can't. Argos was so easy to melt, man. Like once you got a squad, you take down the shield within like a minute and boom, you melt him instantly. He's a cool boss, I'll give him that. He looks cool. The jumping part for Spire, I would say is probably my most favorite jumping section. Toss the balls up to each other as you jumped up, platforms rotating around. There was a secret chest in there. People would mess that ball throwing up so many times. So to me, I felt like this was a pretty fun jumping puzzle, and I think it was probably one of the best that we've had. I would put this jumping section also at C. All right, the observatory section, the first phase. Went up to space, then you threw those balls at the ships. I'm gonna put this encounter at a B. To me, this encounter was so much fun. It was tough. There were tons of enemies. You had to get on the plate, and then you had to like shoot the thing to open up the beam. You had somebody like jump into the beam and then go into space, throw the ball at the ship, blow it up. Then you had to like keep doing that, and it was very constant. It was very chaotic. There were tons of enemies all the time flooding in. So if like you didn't keep track of those enemies, it was really rough. And if people weren't on top of the mechanics, like it would instantly wipe you if you messed up. So that definitely was a tough encounter. But to me, that's what made it so much fun, was the fact that like it was just constant action all the time, every time. Valkyr, the final boss of Spire of Stars. I am gonna put him at an A. I mean, to me, it's everything that you had in the last encounter, the first phase. You had to throw the balls and stuff like that. But at the very end, you got to throw Callus up for a layup and throw it above the ball, above the Callus, as he dunks on Valkyr. And then you gather up in the back for damage and beat the hell out of him. It was so much fun, man. It was the mechanics, everything. Once you had if you had a group that everything like just clicked, this was so much fun to do. It was just very, very satisfying when you would finally take him out. And he just looks cool as hell. I'm not gonna lie. You think he's S tier? I wouldn't argue on that. I wouldn't argue that, and maybe I'll bump him up after we get through the rest of this. But yeah, that was definitely a fun encounter for sure. And he was definitely he was a very tough boss. I think it was overall, I think Spire was probably one of the best raids year 1. The loot wasn't great. Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true now that I think about that. Yeah, actually, yeah. Because the armor, if I remember, the armor was just pretty much like the same armor pieces from each raid, just like with a little bit different. Yeah, it wasn't great. But at least if you did it on prestige mode, you got the armor with like a glow effect on it. So there was that. But Mechanics wise, it was definitely fun. All right, so we had first expansion, Forsaken. We had new supers, and then they gave us right out the gate one of the hardest raids, I think. Last Wish. There are a total of 6 encounters that you have in Last Wish. I'm counting Riven and Queen's Walk as 2 different encounters. Callie with the doors. All right, stand on the plates, charge your plate, do damage, hide in the door. Do that about 3 times. I think this encounter is, in terms of like mechanics and the flow of it and the boss damage, honestly, I don't think this encounter is that great at all. I really don't. I don't think Callie's that great. It's you just stand on a plate and then you kill a knight and then you go and do damage and then you hide in the door and then you do damage and then you hide in the door. It's just, there's nothing to it. Oh no, I stepped in the wrong section of my plate. I'm dead. Oh man, I'm on the wrong plate and we get to kill an ogre or something. There's really nothing to it. And it's hard to judge a lot of these encounters now, because now if I think about these raids, how they are now, the bosses in them are total easy to melt. So I have to kind of like think back then how difficult it was a little bit. But I'm going to put this encounter at a D. This encounter is just a snooze fest to me. It's just like, all right, hop on the plate, guys. All right, everyone's good. All right, mid, let's go mid. All right, do damage. All right, let's hide in the door. Oh, you took my door. Great, I'm dead. All right, whatever. We'll just roll it back. Just revive me. All right, let's do more damage. It's really not that exciting. And the mechanics are just pretty basic. I'm going to put it at D. So right after Callie, we go right into Shirochi. Shirochi. This is where, to me, like the raid starts to get a little bit more difficult. The mechanics, they kind of crank up the mechanics a little bit, because you have to start actually thinking of what you have to do. I'm going to put Shirochi at a B. I feel like the mechanics were pretty decent. Having to learn like with the seed, I know it's like simple, just all right, hop on the plate with the seed, shoot the person to your left. And the puzzle part, like once you learn it, it's pretty easy to understand. But doing all of that with coordinating with the other people that are also doing it, like with the puzzle and with the siege stuff, and having to, the fact that you're on a timer as well, thinking back to like when this raid came out in that first year, that encounter was definitely extremely tough to get through. To have to get through those floors in that certain amount of time. Sometimes we would barely make it past each floor. Definitely a lot of fun, just having to go up the different floors and keep going, keep killing enemies and keep going. And not having to take your foot off the gas there. So to me, Shirochi is a B. After Shirochi, Morgoth. The big, nasty ogre, the pimples on his back. I'm going to put Morgoth at a C. I think his encounter, it's not terrible. It's not absolutely horrible. It's not extremely easy. You do have to pay attention, like who's grabbing what, and you have to unfreeze your teammates. Or honestly, 90% of the time, they just end up dying, and they just go and re-grab the buff. Yeah, you'd have to rank them twice. I agree with that. I could agree with that. It is tough, because like Morgoth and all these bosses in Last Wish is a joke. You one-phase them easily. But back then, it took multiple phases, especially with Morgoth. You get to that second phase and stuff, it gets a little bit difficult. But I would say overall, he was a C. I think the mechanics were not bad. They were a little bit difficult, but overall, to me, I didn't find the encounter really that much fun. It was kind of just waiting around for damage. Shirochi was a slog to get through all the ads. Yeah, exactly. That's why I put Shirochi up at a B. Because to me, it's like, it was really tough to get through the ads. And then you get through the phase, and it's like, you barely make it up to the next floor. Because you have to rush in there, do the puzzle and stuff. So I'd say Morgoth C. So after Morgoth, we go up to the Vault. All right, so the Vault encounter. Ooh, all right. I'm going to say the Vault encounter to me, I'm going to say Vault's an A. Actually, no. Well, yeah, I'd say A. I'm going to keep it A. I'm keeping the Vault an A. To me, the Vault's an A. I was going to put it at a B, but I definitely had way more fun doing the Vault than I did with Shirochi. Because to me, the Vault was like, all right, let's take the mechanics. Let's give you a whole new different bunch of mechanics with the symbol reading. You have to grab the ball, run through the tunnels, make sure the knight doesn't stab his sword on the plate. And back then, like the knight was a pain in the ass to kill. It was such a pain. So you had to like kind of work together on that. Just like getting the reading done quickly, getting in there and stuff like that. A lot of people found like the reading to be very difficult. And then you had to remember penumbra and antumbra. You had to remember, like, all right, are you P, are you A? You had to kind of like remember that in your mind. I kind of like that kind of mechanic, kind of like the third encounter in VoG, which we'll get to. But I think this was definitely a really, really fun encounter. I like the mechanics. I thought the enemy density, the number of enemies there, I thought was pretty good too as well. And then we get into Riven. Riven, you know, like you were saying, is like, I would say like Riven, I'm almost would have to do like Riven cheese version and then Riven legit version. I'm gonna grade this Riven as you know what? I'm just gonna look at it as a whole. So like, let's look at Riven as like legit Riven, masterpiece. Cheese Riven, also just generally fun to do. Not fixing Riven. Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, because honestly, like, I've done legit Riven like maybe like 2 or 3 times, and it was super tough, but it was a lot of fun. And I think if they would have just patched that whole thing, forced people to do it the legit way, honestly, that probably would have made people better at raiding in the end. To have to learn all the callouts, what eyes to shoot, like have to coordinate that with your team, write that down. Yeah, I would say, but as a whole, I would say, like, I'm just gonna look at Riven as a whole and just say, like, the legit part of Riven, the mechanics, everything was a masterpiece. The cheese version of Riven, although it was extremely easy and it's kind of a shame they didn't patch it, it was still a lot of fun to do with people, and I still had a good time doing it. So I'm gonna put Riven at S tier. I think Riven is a masterpiece. Cheese or not cheese. And then Queen's Walk to end it off. I would put Queen's Walk at a D. I did not enjoy Queen's Walk at all whatsoever. Not saying it's okay, like, yeah, I would honestly put Queen's Walk down there with Callie and with the first phase of Eater. I mean, but like, look, the only reason why people like the Queen's Walk is because of the fact that you could get 1k or something at the end of it. That's the only reason. Other than that, the fact that you're gonna get like that loot at the end, if you took that part away from it, just you have to run with the ball through the hallways and not stay close to your enemies. How frustrating that is when somebody is like either running too far away from you and you die from the darkness, or the people inside the heart aren't calling out and they're not grabbing the stuff. That stuff is so frustrating to do. And I would say about every time I ran Queen's Walk, I would say about like 75% of the people in there did not even know the route to running or wouldn't even grab stuff to extend the timer. You can't believe what you're hearing? Brother, come on, I mean, like, how many who around is like, man, you know what's my favorite part of Last Wish? Queen's Walk. No. They're gonna be like, you know what's my favorite part of Last Wish? Riven. Riven is like the cake, and Queen's Walk's just like the cherry on top. And honestly, I can leave without the cherry. I could take the cherry off. They could have had us kill Riven at the end, kill her heart, and then just end their raid there, and I would have been okay with it. Maybe that's a hot take, I don't know, but to me, that's where I'm landing with it. After Last Wish, we get into the next, one of my favorite raids, Scourge of the Past. But just because it's my favorite doesn't mean I think every encounter was the best. The intro part, you had to have a map reader. Yeah, usually had somebody defending the map reader. And then you had the 4 people running with their sparrows through the alleyways and stuff like that. Going from point to point, killing the guy, and then you had to kill that special fallen dude, I forget his name. You had to shoot the back, and then you had to shoot the front, and then do DPS it after you stun him. It was really fun. Yeah, I had a good time. Berserkers, yeah. Okay, yeah, Berserkers. I think this intro part was pretty good. Out of all the intro raid parts that we've ever had, I would say this is a really good intro to the raid. It taught people the mechanics of killing the Berserkers, which was obviously extremely important later on. Also, just really, really cool. You could like hop on your sparrow in an encounter that was like the first of its kind. And just riding around the last city too. Also really, really cool. I'm gonna put the intro part at B. After the intro, we get through to one of the most memorable parts of the raid that everyone remembers. And that's the Sparrow Race. The big flamey servitor. This Sparrow Race. I have so many good memories on this Sparrow Race. And the sparrow you get from it, it's a great sparrow, one of the fastest in the game, obviously. I don't know where to rank this. This is pretty tough for me. I mean, mechanics-wise, it really wasn't anything besides just hit the buttons and stay alive in the race. But the fact that we haven't gotten anything like this, I guess unless you want to count the Sparrow section and Grasp of Avarice, but I think this was definitely a highlight of the raid that everybody looked forward to. Even people that I would like Sherpa through this raid, they all knew about this part. And this was pretty much the only part that they knew about for this raid. So it was very well known. Everybody knew about it. Everybody talked about it. I had a lot of fun, had a lot of good memories. I'm going to put the Sparrow Race part of this raid at an S tier. I think just because of how memorable it was, how much fun I had doing this part, how many good memories I've had just like with other people racing and knocking each other off sparrows and stuff like that. I think it deserves to hold that place up there at the S tier. So first phase of the final boss, Vault Access part, is the intro part where you went down to the tunnels. You had typically you had 3 people go down the tunnels, 3 people would stay outside the tunnels, up in the mid, killing shanks and other ads, while the people in the tunnel would go around and get their shape. You get triangle, circle, square. Then you would leave, hop in a tank, shoot the thing in the middle, and that's all you would do. Mechanics wise, it was really simple, but it surprises me. It surprised me every time how many times people didn't know their shapes. You would think maybe it would be easier with shapes and not having to remember symbols like in Last Wish or in VoW, but I feel like more people messed up not knowing what symbol they had. Overall, I think it was cool to get in the tank. That was kind of fun. You had to shoot the thing in the middle with the tank, all that. If you're on ad clear, there were tons of shanks. I'm going to put this encounter down at D. It wasn't great. It was super easy. I mean, it wasn't terrible. There were some good moments in it. But like, I would put this encounter in the same realm as like the first Eater of Worlds phase. You're just waiting. You're waiting. All right, let's just get through this encounter, guys, so we can get to the final boss already. Come on. However, this encounter led to one of the best boss fights, I think, of all time. Insurrection Prime. Insurrection Prime, the final boss in Scourge of the Past, was so good. This was so much fun. You had a map reader. You had 4 people doing the bomb. You had 1 dude shooting the weak spots up on the building. The arena was sick. You had the 4 buildings. You had the map reader in the back. You had the map reader getting hit with ads. You had the guy out on the buildings trying to hit the weak spots. To deal with the snipers as well. You had the guys rushing to kill the berserkers. They kill the berserkers. They'd have to go and deposit their bomb, hop in the tank, shoot the boss. If you didn't destroy all the weak spots in time, you were screwed. And you had to down the boss. Then you had to down the boss facing the right building or the right area, because if you didn't face the right way, it was a wipe, because people would be doing damage in the middle of nowhere, or people would be forgetting where to stand. And then on top of that, you had people being like, well, what are we doing? CAP? PAC? CPA? I don't know. It was just like, it was a mess sometimes with LFGs. But I think once you had a solid group, you had a really good raid squad, and you went into this, and it was like, boys, we're doing CAP. We're going to make them face that orange building every time, and we're going to get this done. It was so much fun. Also, I have to point out and say, this was when we had the sniper rifle damage meta, the Whisper and the Izanagi's damage meta. And it was so awesome to hear 6 Whisper of the Worms firing at the same time. Ooh, man, it was so good. It was so good. And the fact that the boss is a giant freaking robot? Like, come on, man. This is S tier. So S tier. I'm definitely throwing this in S tier. If there was an S+, I'd throw it in S+. Yeah, I remember using Whisper. Whisper was so much fun. I really wish we had a Whisper damage meta back again. Oh, man. And that is Scourge of the Past for me. After Scourge of the Past, we keep going through the year. We're playing Gambit Prime. We're doing all those stuff that we're really wishing, man, why do we have to play Gambit? I don't want to, just someone stop this, please. Then we get the Menagerie, one of the best activities in the game. And what they give us with Menagerie, they give us Crown of Sorrow. People who have been in the Little Light Brigade for a while know that it is one of my favorite raids. And I'm gonna get to it. I'm gonna get to it. After that. All right. Okay, so first encounter of Crown of Sorrow. The first chest you get is after the intro section. Right here. Intro section, split into 3 teams of 2. You and your teammate you each have to get a buff. Every team has to get 1 buff. You had to alternate the buff because there was a timer on it. It was like 30 seconds, or I think it was like a minute, pretty sure. You had to kill ads, but only you could kill the enemies. If you were buffed, you could only kill the buffed enemies, and then your teammate had to kill the non-buffed enemies. So it was, I think, probably one of the best mechanics that we've had in raiding. Like the fact that, like, if I had a buff, I could only kill these certain enemies. I couldn't kill those enemies. Like, to me, that was like a great mechanic. It was a very simple mechanic, but it was a great mechanic because it really forced you to work with your teammate and just the other people on your team to really kind of clear the ads. And if you didn't clear the ads, it would just stock up and you would just have tons of ads walking around, and you'd have ogres come in later on and just mess you up. So intro to me, I really like that mechanic of getting the witches. I think it's witch's blessing or witch's curse or whatever. I like that mechanic. And then you had to trade it with your teammate at the ball. You had to, everyone had to get in the circle real quickly, shoot it, trade it. Then you had to deal with the crystals on top of that. You had to go and shoot this crystal at the right time. For me, man, I'm going to put this intro section at B. I think because of the mechanics and how action-packed it was, having to trade the buff every minute, having to watch for that crystal every single time. It was very intense, and it was very filled with action. And to me, that's what made it so much fun. I mean, right out the gate, it's the first intro part. You had to do all that stuff. Very crazy, very hectic. People probably hate it because it was so crazy and hectic like that. But to me, I thought it was really fun. I had a good time doing it. So after the intro, though, we get into the jumping section. The jumping section is where we got our next chest. Now, if you don't remember the jumping section, it was like same thing. You had the Witch's Curse. You had to trade it on and off with your like a bunch of people. And you had to shoot crystals in the sky and then jump up the platforms and do the melee on the shielded crystals and then keep going to swapping the buffs every now and then. I think and as far as like the jumping part goes and shooting the crystals and all that, I'm going to say this was probably one of the weakest parts of this raid. I know how they designed this jumping part was like, all right, well, do the same thing you did in the beginning, like have 3 people with the buff, 3 people without the buff, and just go through the jumping and swap every now and then. But what it really devolved into was just like, all right, like who's going to be a good jumper and stay alive with the buff? Like who in our team is good at jumping and getting through the platforming and not going to die? Let's give them the buff. And at least if one person makes it to the end, it puts all the platforms up. So I think that this is probably the weakest point in the raid. It wasn't a ton of fun. It was really more frustrating than anything. And I think that's where a lot of this bad rap gets, is because at this point, I think a lot of people are like, man, screw this whole Witch's Curse thing. Screw these crystals. Because they're just kind of over it. Because you're going to make them do jumping along with this? Yeah, okay. People are going to hate it. I'm going to put this at D. I think it was probably one of the weakest, I'm not going to say worst, but I think it's probably one of the weakest like jumping encounters we've had in Destiny. I would have rather done the Eater Worlds intro part with that platforming than do that. All right, well, we get through the jumping part and we get to the first boss, which is Galron's Deception. The mini Galron, the baby Galron. The Galron with the double swords that we had to kill like 6 of in duels. This boss in this encounter, if you don't recall, you had to be split up with your teammates into the section, and then walls would go up between each side. And you had to lower the walls by transferring the buff around to each team. And after you transferred the buff around at the end, you'd have to run up and punch the Deception to break the shield. Then people could do DPS for a short amount of time. He'd get the shield back, and you can lower his shield basically like 3 times to do damage to him. I think this was a pretty cool way of using the Witch's Curse. The fact that they kept the teams separated with walls so you couldn't help each other out. So you really had to just work with your teammate and clearing the ads. And if one team got overwhelmed and died, it was a wipe. So it really kind of relied on you and your teammate doing good, ad clear work and managing the buff and staying alive, which I thought was pretty cool. And then the DPS part to me is where it falls down, where I give it some minus points there. The DPS was not fun. Like having to have the people with the buff stay away from the boss and just stand there and just wait until it's their time to punch the boss. Also the fact that you could glitch it. If I remember, like you would just tag him with like Anarchy when you had the buff, and it would kind of just break the shield nonstop and you could just one phase him. And especially later on, he was extremely easy to melt. For me, I'm going to say not great DPS, mechanics okay, so I'm going to put this at a C. To me, it's like right there with Morgith and the Eater Worlds boss. I think the mechanics were not bad, but overall the damage meta and damage phase was very lackluster. It was nothing special. But then that leads us into Galron, the final boss, Crown of Sorrow. This is where, for me, personally, I find this boss as being one of my favorite bosses in Destiny. The only thing I don't like about this boss is that he just stands there. That's the only thing I don't like. I wish they would have made Galron move around the room a little bit more and not just be a stationary boss. I mean, the man was huge, which would have been pretty awesome if you had 3 copies of Galron roaming around the map. But overall, I think this was a perfect blend of all the mechanics in this raid. Trading the Witch's Curse off with your teammate, killing the wizards and the ogres on your side, having to also take care of the crystals, and also call that out to your teammates. Say, okay, we killed our crystal. Dogs team, Crystal, you're up next. Purple team, you're up next with the crystal. Like the fact that you had to not only remember when to transfer your buff with your teammate, but you had to also call out to the other teams where the crystal's at. And you had to keep an eye on that. There was so much going on, and you had to clear ads. There was a lot of stuff going on, and then you had to kill the deception. You had to kill the Galron's deception, and then you had to shoot him in the hand, kill the copy of Galron, move to where the real copy is, do the damage, and then you had to keep swapping the buff with your teammate. To me, this encounter and the mechanics behind it was such a good blend. It was the perfect encounter for teamwork. It really separate everybody else into teams of two, and just having to use that teamwork and that coordination with the entire squad. What to me is what raiding is all about. I want to be able to use my call outs and the teamwork and everything together all in one encounter. I don't want to have to do just one separate thing. This was it was so crazy that to me it was so good. But I can understand why people hate this encounter and hate this raid because of the fact that it was frustrating to destroy the crystal. Sometimes it didn't work. I will admit, it was a pain in the ass sometimes, having to jump up and punch that crystal. But once you got it down, once every team was on point, and everything was so smooth, it was such a good encounter. So I'm going to put Galron up there in the S tier. Teraba as well, I think, is an underrated gun. I think it's a pretty good machine gun. Maybe when it came out, it wasn't that great. It was overshadowed by a lot of other good stuff. But I do think, in general, Teraba is good. It was also an extremely low drop rate, if I remember. So if somebody got it, it was super exciting, and it was a good time. Honestly, I think also the armor from this raid was pretty good. So that's Crown of Sorrow for me. After Crown of Sorrow, it was the last season, the best year of Destiny that we've had in a long time. We moved from Forsaken into Shadowkeep. Shadowkeep was a interesting year, I'll just say that. And with Shadowkeep, we ended up getting Garden of Salvation was the first Vex raid of Destiny 2. And I also think this was also a pretty good raid. But the first chest is the intro part. So the intro part of Garden of Salvation. This is where they teach you the basic mechanic of the tether. Looking for the tether boxes, using that to open up the doors. Kind of bunny hopping over the other team and just unlocking the doors, racing to the end. For an intro encounter, I thought it was pretty good. It taught you the mechanics of the tether. It taught you the mechanics of that voltaic overflow as well. So that was also great. Having to, you grab it first, I grab it second, third, whatever. Having to work with your team on that. Also doing just ad clear in general. When this raid first came out, the ad clear was a pain in the butt. The enemies hit you really hard. Cyclopses would one-shot you. And this is the first raid that they introduced champions into. So we had the Overload champions right there in the first encounter as well. I think this is a pretty good intro. Having to deal with the champions, with the tether, doing the reminding when is it your turn to grab the overflow, having to bunny hop over your teammates. I think overall this was a pretty good intro part. It really kind of got the blood pumping. You got through this and then you got into the jumping part, and it was a good time. It was a lot of fun. So I would put this intro at a B tier. I think this intro's a little bit better than the Spire of Stars intro, but I think it's on par with the Scourge, first encounter in Scourge, and the first encounter in Crown. Then we get into Conflux, where everybody had to defend a Conflux, and then you had your runners in between. I'm going to say this encounter for me, right off the bat, I'm just going to say it's a C. I think it's a pretty average encounter. We already knew the tether mechanic going into it. This is where they teach you, they give you the Enlighten buff, I think it was. You get that buff, and they teach you that, how to deal with that, and have to recharge it every 45 seconds or so. And then you had to just play wave defense. And then your runner would just keep refreshing it over and over. There were barrier champions in this encounter. That was kind of interesting. But again, overall, it was I would compare this encounter to the first encounter in Vault of Glass, where you defend those conflicts. It's kind of similar. It's just you're just kind of waiting around, defending your conflicts, waiting for your runner to come and get your buff back again. So it wasn't too exciting. Mechanic we already kind of knew. I'd leave it at C tier. All right, after Confluxes, we get into the Consecrated Mind, the Harpy boss that everybody knows from Spire of the Watcher, the new dungeon. I can guarantee that there are probably more people in Destiny now that have played Spire and faced this boss than they have done Garden of Salvation. Consecrated Mind, I thought that encounter, This is where they introduced the Gambit mechanic and how you get your Enlightened buff from depositing the Gambit motes. And then the damage phase, of course, you get the motes in. Then you go down the hallway, do damage to them. Then you had your eyes team, had to shoot all the eyes. You had to shoot the correct eye on the Consecrated Mind. I would say this encounter to me is also a C. The DPS was kind of meh. It was okay. It wasn't amazing. The mechanics itself, you're just playing Gambit. You just grab motes, go and deposit them. It wasn't that great of an encounter. It wasn't really that tough. Just get irritated if you miss a mote or if they would go through the floor. That stuff sucked. So to me, I'd say this belongs in C tier. And then we go through some more jumping parts and we get to the final boss, the Sanctified Mind. Sanctified Mind, man. All right, Sanctified Mind. Sanctified Mind, to me, that fight, the final fight in Garden of Salvation, right? This fight was very frustrating when it first came out because I remember playing on my Xbox One back in the day. And back then, in the final fight in Xbox One, when you were wiping multiple times and you'd have all that glimmer in the ammo in the Vex milk, it would ruin your frames on an Xbox One, and you would be literally just lagging in-game because there's so much stuff in the Vex milk that you can't even see. And you can't even go and get it because the boss is out there and you'll die. So to me, I think this encounter is good. I think it's good, but I don't think it's amazing. I'm not going to put Sanctified Mind in the S tier. I think the damage part where you had to use stand together near like the confluxes and stuff, you had to do the tether, you had to have people rebuilding the floors, you had some people on Gambit team. I thought that stuff was kind of cool, having to coordinate with your teams. If you had a good team on rebuilding the floors, it was awesome. But if you had a bad team rebuilding the floors, it was terrible. It was a horrible time for everybody. So I think this is overall a solid encounter, which is why I would put it at A. I don't think it's elite like Riven, but I think the mechanics, the perfect blend of the mechanics and everything come together here. And especially when this raid first came out and everybody was chasing divinity, when you finally kill this guy and you get your divinity, oh my god, it is so satisfying watching that guy go down. And back then we had the Izanagi's meta, we had the Xenophage meta. It was so much fun to do damage on this guy, especially if you had a really good team doing it. So yeah, I would put this encounter at like an A. And that's Garden of Salvation for me. So now, after Garden of Salvation, we go through the year of Shadowkeep. Wasn't my favorite year, to be honest. We get into Deepstone Crypt is the next raid with Beyond Light. Deepstone Crypt, arguably one of my favorite raids of all time. Well, let's break down these encounters. So the first encounter, where you get the first chest, I didn't include the Sparrow section because again, I only included encounters that give you like a chest at the end. And I'm not going to count like the bonus chest and all that. So first encounter is the security encounter. Security counter. Okay, well, this is where they first teach you about the scanner and the operator. For a first encounter, I think this is a pretty good first encounter. And the many times I've Sherped this raid, and just the many times I've done it with just people who know what they're doing, this is always a good and fun encounter to do. It's super easy if you know if you have a team that knows what they're doing. It's also pretty challenging for new players too. This is the first time they learn scanner and operator. And I think the scanner and operator mechanic, it's pretty simple, but I think it's pretty good for this type of like intro part. You don't have a crazy boss coming at you. You have just these fuses. You have overload champions that they have to deal with. Exploder shanks during the damage phase. Captains and stuff. All those enemies in the basement for the operator to deal with by himself. When this raid first came out, it was definitely tough to deal with the ads, especially the champions and stuff. So you really had to kind of, get your crap together and make sure you clear the ads. I would say for a first encounter, this to me is like it's a C tier. I thought it was a great first encounter, but in terms of the difficulty and what it, how hard it could have been a little bit harder. I think if you knew what you were doing with scanner and you knew what you were doing with operator, generally this encounter was pretty dang easy. And there really wasn't, there's a lot of times I've done this encounter where we just kind of go through the motions and we already know what we're doing and we're just doing it. It is what it is. Doesn't mean it's terrible. I don't think it's a D tier, but I think it's just a little bit better in C, but I don't think it's middle of the pack and I don't think it's up there in A. We get through the security though, and we get to Atrax. Probably one of the most memorable bosses of Deepstone. Atrax is so much fun, especially if you have Missile Titans. But that is where I think you have to look at this encounter and we have to push away those thoughts of the Missile Titans. We have to just exclude them from this conversation and like this debate. We got to think about Atrax as a whole and the mechanics and everything. I would put Atrax at an A. A for Atrax. I think Atrax was a great boss in terms of mechanics, in terms of just damage. The fact that it was a boss where we had to do quick burst damage really fast and you just couldn't let up. You had to do it quickly. And then on top of that, after you do the damage, you had to transfer the buff back down to the other team. Then you had to go get rid of the replication debuff after you pick it up off the floor. It's a very hectic encounter and very action-packed. So I think it's really good in terms of like, you know, action. And I think the mechanics itself, like having to eject the buff. So if you get the buff when you're downstairs, you have to go upstairs and go to the airlock up there. The operator has to make sure he doesn't get the buff. And then the scanner, so many like anxiety-ridden moments where like the scanner is just standing there like, all right, God, which one is it? Which one is it? And they're just looking down the hallways and stuff. Some really good moments there. And then the final stand, of course. And again, I'm not thinking about the Missile Titan aspect of it. Yes, Atrax is extremely easy to just melt with a couple Missile Titans nowadays. But back in the day when this first came out, you had to use Lament, like Sword Her Down, or Fourth Horseman, or 1K, or Xenophage, or whatever. It was really fun. It was a good time having to transfer the buff and stuff up and down. So we go through the jumping part, Deep Stone. We all love our Deep Space Lullaby, of course. And then we're going to get into the Descent. The third encounter of Deep Stone Crypt, you had to dunk these nuclear bombs in the middle, and this is where they introduced the suppressor buff the first time too. Descent encounter, you know, I think this is probably up there with probably like one of my favorite encounters that don't have bosses. So like a non-boss damage encounter, like one where you're just like doing something else that's not DPS on a boss. This is probably one of my favorite encounters out of that kind of group. It was very hectic, insanely like just crazy with all the amount of enemies that they had in there. Plus they mix in overload captains as well. When this first came out, it was definitely a lot of fun to just do chaos mode and just be like, all right, whatever you find, just grab it and just do the job. And of course the run at the end, you go down the hallway, people throwing ice walls up, people doing whatever kind of shenanigans they can do. This is probably up there with one of my favorite encounters for sure. So I would put this encounter, I would put it at an A. Sure, it's super easy to do now. But when it first came out too, it was very tough to do because just the amount of enemies that are around, as well as just they introduced the suppressor buff in that encounter. So everybody kind of had to know what role to do. And I also just love the challenge for that encounter too. Having to like swap the buff, you had to like use a different buff than used before and stuff like that. You had to like look at that chart. I thought that was a great encounter. So for me, Descent is at an A. But then we get into the final boss. It's your boy, Taniks. The guy that will not stop coming back. He will always be a Destiny villain. I really don't think he's dead. I am not convinced that he's dead. I really am convinced that we'll see him again at some point in time. I don't know where. Maybe as like a little trophy in the tower. Maybe as like a AI, he'll come back. It'll be like AI Taniks. I don't know, man. He's gonna come back. I think one way or the another. Let's talk about his fight though at the end. That encounter. So Taniks, when he first came out, I remember doing Taniks, the 2-core method, all the time. And then everyone was like, what are we doing? Just do the 4-core method. You get an extra damage phase. You don't have to do the scanner. It's 100% easier. So once we swapped to the 4-core method, to me, that is when this encounter dropped down in points to me. Yes, it was still a fun encounter. It was still a good time to run with the cores, dunk them, make sure everybody got theirs in, meet up for damage, hop in, do damage to him. And then like you're just praying you got Eyes of Tomorrow, and then when you finally get that Eyes of Tomorrow, you're just so happy. It's a good moment. It's a good time. But for me, I think that Taniks is just a B. He's just a B tier boss to me. I don't think he's amazing. I don't think he's terrible. I think he's just middle of the pack. You just get the cores in, you meet up for damage. It is what it is. You don't have to do scanner. You're just hanging out. You're chilling. But for me, Taniks is a B tier. So that's Deep Stone Crypt. We get through Beyond Light. And again, I'm not including any of the remade raids. I'm not including Vault of Glass. I'm not including Kings Fall. Because to me, if I were to do a tier list with Vault of Glass or Kings Fall, I would have to do a Destiny 1 tier list for that. I don't feel it's right to include them into this list because I want to look at Destiny 2's specific brand new raids that we got. So then the next and final raid then would be Vow of the Disciple with Witch Queen. Vow of the Disciple, man. It was a very rocky launch. I remember that launch day. Some people couldn't get into the raid. It was a really big problem. But that day one was a lot of fun. It was a good time, especially because they extended it even further for like 48 hours. So the first encounter would be the acquisition. Again, I'm not going to count like the intro part with the boat because you just got a bonus chest there. It's nothing like, an actual pinnacle chest. So acquisition, the first encounter a Vow Disciple. This is where you gotta learn your symbols. People who didn't know their symbols could get off on this encounter. They could slide by, you know, being like, all right, I'll just defend the obelisk. You do the running. In terms of mechanics, I think the symbols and the symbol reading, running into the room, memorizing which one you killed, killing the knights, shooting the symbols on your obelisk. I think the mechanic itself was pretty simple. Just, hey, kill this guy, memorize the symbol, look at the thing on your pillar, call it out, working together as a team, opening the doors, stuff like that. I think in terms of mechanics, it was pretty simple. In terms of like difficulty, I think it was middle of the pack with difficulty. You had the unstoppable champion that would come in every now and then. The defender kind of really had to be on point sometimes. If you had a good defender, it was pretty easy. If you guys couldn't keep the ads down, it was pretty tough. So I think the fact that the mechanics were a little bit easier and the enemies were kind of middle of the road, I would put this at like a C tier. I think it's on par with the Deep Stone Crypt security encounter. It's a good intro encounter to learn like the mechanics, but I think overall it wasn't extremely tough. But it is what it is. I mean, that's what it's meant to be. It's for the first encounter. But I'm going to grade it how I see it, and that's how I see it. We get through the acquisition, and we go up those stairs, and we get to our boy, the Caretaker. Caretaker. Oh my god. So many struggling points and wipes day one getting through this guy. He was a pain because it was just a struggle doing damage to him. On day one, it was at least. Nowadays, we do way too much damage to him to the point where the game just stops you. Which, if they didn't build those guards in, easily like 1 or 2 for him. Which I understand why they did it. Caretaker, you have your runners, you have your stunners, you have the guys doing ad clear. In terms of mechanics, we're looking at, this is where they bring into us doing the running, grabbing the symbols in the room, stunning the boss. You have to run up to the next floor, do it again, do it again. I'm going to put Caretaker at a B. I think it was pretty tough, and it really depended on who you had in your fire team. If you had a good people that were really good at stunning, it was not a bad problem because they would keep the boss stunned all the time. But if they let up on the boss even a little bit, he's running up those stairs, man. He's getting there. And then same thing for the runners, getting the symbols. If they die in there a couple times, they shoot the wrong symbols, it can get kind of out of hand really quickly. And for people who aren't really that used to running, it's kind of a challenge. Ad clear guys, they are on vacation. They're not doing anything. Unless it's a master vow. Then they're doing something. But those are the guys who don't know how to read symbols and they just want to kind of chill and do ad clear. Not to say they're not important, but there's really not much to do there. Anyways, that's why I would put this at B. I think the damage phase too. I think the damage phase was easy enough to understand. You know, go from one plate to the next plate to the next plate. Oh, we did too much damage. Now he's up on the second floor. You know, it's pretty easy. It's nothing crazy. So that's why I think he's like middle of the pack. He's not amazing. He's not terrible. He's right there in the middle. Not a bad boss. But then we get to the third encounter, which would be Exhibition. Or just the artifact encounter. People would probably remember it as. Where you get the nut, you get the shield, and you get that taken orb. This encounter has been a thorn in my side for so many times. So many runs where we get to this encounter, and it's just a absolute mess. But that doesn't mean it's not bad. That doesn't mean it's terrible. That doesn't mean it's amazing either. I think in terms of like mechanic wise, I think this is pretty good. The fact that they brought back old relics from old raids at this time too. They gave us the Vault of Glass relic. They gave us the artifact from Last Wish, the Taken Orb. And then they introduced the Darkness Laser. That's a new. So the fact that they kind of brought back those old artifacts, I really like that. And each room in itself was just absolutely crazy and hectic with enemies everywhere. Overload champions also hanging out, and a bunch of chieftains around. And then you go to trade relics in the middle rooms, and there's screebs on the floor, of course. So I think for me, this encounter is an A. I would put this encounter up to where Descent is in Deep Stone Crypt. I think they're pretty much on par with each other. The exhibition encounter is a good time. It's fun. Master mode, it sucks, but it means it's very difficult, which isn't a terrible thing again. But I think it's overall a solid encounter. I think it's better than average, but I don't think it's S tier. So I'm putting it at A. All right, let's get to the boy, the final raid boss for now until Lightfall. Our man Rolk. All right, he's straight trash. No, I'm just kidding. All right, I'm not putting Rolk in the trash. No, Rolk, his encounter is probably one of the most unique boss fights up there with Insurrection Prime. He's also unique like Valkor. His mechanics, you know. You have to do it's just a perfect blend of the entire raid. You have to memorize your symbols. You have to have some people calling out. You have to have people doing the splitting. You have to make sure you're not getting hit by Roke's laser or you get the 3 stacks of the darkness. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good encounter mechanic-wise, because if your team's not paying attention, you forget a symbol, you take a little bit too long, person with the buff dies, and then you might just wipe. Or if you're up in Roke's room, doing the dunking up there, you take too long, he just says, all right, screw it, no damage phase for you, and you have to leave. So, and then the damage phase of Roke, I mean, come on, one of the best damage phases, I think, in the game. I mean, a boss that literally sprints at you and wants to get into like a judo, kickboxing match, MMA fight in the middle of this arena. It's so unique and so awesome that I have to put Roke in the S tier. He's such a unique boss and he's so much fun. Every time I do this raid, I look forward to the final encounter, because it's always fun to, just seeing like, what the hell is this guy gonna do now? Is he gonna sprint forward and just kick somebody off the map? Is he gonna just like sprint off the arena and just stand there in midair? And we're like, all right, buddy, like, come on. There's some good moments in that final fight, especially some very clutch moments in the final section, like I don't know, what do you want to call it? I keep forgetting. The final part where you have like 10 seconds to kill him. So many like clutch moments where like somebody hit him with a Wither Horde at the last second and we all die, but the Wither Horde ticks and kills him for us. That's happened a couple of times. So to me, I definitely would have to put Roke there. But that is all the encounters. I'm just going to look through them real quick and see if I really want to make any adjustments. Alright guys, so I did make a couple adjustments here at the end on the tier list. I will just tell you what I made for the adjustments. Really all I changed at the end was just moving around the Spire of Stars boss. I put Valkyr up top, and I really think he deserves that S tier rating. He's a really fun boss. The mechanics are really great. The enemies were tough at the time. Even after the end, before it got sunsetted, it was still pretty tough to do. So I think it deserves that S tier spot, but that was really the only change I did, and I just kind of shuffled everything in after I kind of moved it around there. But that's my tier list. Again, I'm going to post it on social media. Follow me on Twitter. I'll put a blank one up there as well if you want to do it yourself. But just let me know in the comments below what you think of my tier list. Do you think I got some of this right? You could totally disagree with me. Let me know, though. And also just let me know what you think about these encounters. Did you like some of them? Did you hate some of them? Where would you throw them? Like, which encounter did you actually think is a D tier that maybe I put up top? So let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.